Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology and leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing, mixed in with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme and how to bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through and take inspired action to make our lives better. So grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. I'm Stephanie, your friendly neighborhood bookologist, here with a book flight today. Now, ever since this podcast began, I've been sharing books along particular themes. We've had themes like books about cake, books that will take you places, books that will send you to the stationery store, along with things like books to explore eating disorders or books for when you get a diagnosis. We may have light content and deep content, but essentially, I love recommending books in sets of 3s. It gives us a chance to dive into a topic, to explore something in more depth, yet still get different perspectives. I may not always call it a book flight, but that's exactly what it is. It's a small collection of texts to dive into something new. Well, today, if you are listening to this episode in real time, we have just observed Labor Day here in the United States. And for many, myself included, it's kind of considered a second New Year's, right? If you are a teacher or a student, you are literally starting a new academic year. But even if you're not, you still have those back to school vibes that you remember. And a lot of people like to look at this particular part of the year as a way to end the year strong. So it could be a new academic year for you. You could be remembering those back to school vibes that you used to have, or you know that we're nearing the end of the year and moving into the final quarter. And so it's kind of like a fresh start. So today, I want to bring 3 books that give us a certain kind of back to school vibe, right? So in my neck of the woods in upstate New York, back to school time means, in addition to going back to school, cooler weather, shorter days, all things apples and pumpkins, my favorite. And for many, it's moving into a new season. It's fall and autumn. And that means, if you're a mood reader, that you tend to move into a different aspect of your reading life, right? So we're going to take that sweater weather kind of vibe outside and bring the sweater weather kind of vibe inside to our reading life. So today I've got 3 books with back to school vibes. Right? We're going to get into the back to school spirit, or at least just get into a fall reading kind of mood. Now, 2 of them are adult fiction novels, and 1 of them is a memoir. Now, it was interesting because as I did my research for this episode, as I went through my own book journal and my bookish spreadsheet, as I went online to some of my favorite sites to see if they had any books that perhaps I forgot to consider, I found that most of the fiction back to school books, at least in the adult fiction world, they definitely have a certain vibe. They're suspenseful. They're mysterious. Something's happening that we're often trying to figure out. Most of the books that I have read so far set in a back to school theme, set in academia, set inside a school or a boarding house, a boarding school. They have these suspenseful, mood reading, mysterious kind of vibes. And that is true of the first 2 books that I have for you. The first one is I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. Now, I have a rule, just unofficial rule in my reading life. And if you know me, you know I love talking about my reading rules. Christy Zimmer and I actually created a reading rules printable to help us figure out how our reading rules applied to our life rules. If you'd like to take a peek, you can go to alitlife.com and find it. But one of my rules is that if a book is recommended to me 3 times, I have to read it. I know, I don't know where it came from, but if three people that I probably am connected to and close to and I know fairly well, if they actually personally recommend a book to me, well, then the third time's the charm and I go for it. This was one of those books. This was recommended all over the place by friends, by family, by colleagues, by my virtual friends online. It was a very popular book, and I could see why after reading it. This story was different than any other book that I've read. The story was compelling, yes. The writing was strong, very strong. But the format was so different than most books I read. And that's what really drew me into this. It really was kind of like going back to school myself because I had to work at first in order to figure out the structure so that I could then figure out the story that was set in a school. So this book is about Bodie Kane, and Bodie has returned to her own personal boarding school as an adult to teach podcasting and film. Of course, I was interested in that because, well, I have a podcast. And just the idea of a boarding school is something that I have absolutely no experience with. And so I knew this would be a good book to kind of broaden what I think. So she returns to her boarding school to teach, but instead of just teaching, she has become completely entrenched in the decades-old murder of her fellow classmate. Something that she tried to forget, something that she tried to put out of her mind, but it's back front and center. And the students that she is teaching want to do a project around that murder. So she can't avoid it. She is knee deep and she's starting to uncover things that she doesn't understand and she doesn't like. Now, the book is completely written as a narrative to another character that I will not say, so I do not spoil the book. And so as a reader, you literally get to follow Bodhi's inner thinking about what's going on, along with what's actually going on, along with her hypotheses and some of the personal information that she's alluding to as well. It is so many lines of thinking that it really kept me on my toes putting it all together. And just when I thought I had it all figured out, I totally didn't. So this is a book that's going to make you think. It's going to make your brain want to dig in and figure out the structure and the format. And it is definitely going to keep you turning the pages. It's got all the back to school vibes because it is actually set in a boarding school. And it also has that fall mood reading, mystery, suspense, trying to solve this decades-old murder. So that is I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. Now, the second book is also another fall vibes, suspenseful kind of book. And if you know me, and if you've been listening to the almost 80 episodes that we have, I think that you do, I don't tend to gravitate towards these books. They need to be placed in front of me. And just like I Have Some Questions for You, The It Girl by Ruth Ware, well, that was put squarely in front of me too. I love a good family saga. They are my favorite kind of realistic fiction novels. And while this book isn't a family saga, it is a friendship saga for sure. These group of friends have buried themselves deep into a saga of their own, and it ends in murder. So yes, I became instantly lost in these pages, even though this is not a book that I typically gravitate towards, because I also love the structure in this book. This book has kind of a before and after structure. So before she died, before the murder, and after. And so here's what happens. In the before section, right, when the murder happens, Hannah is a new college student at Oxford, and her college roommate has really taken her under her wing. And she introduces her to this whole completely new side of life. April is just everything Hannah needed. But April is killed in their dorm room. And of course, everything changes. And even as the years pass, Hannah cannot shake it. I mean, who could? That's a pretty traumatic event. So years and years later, when April's killer dies in prison, all of these emotions that Hannah's been trying to push down, they just come up and they resurface, including the thoughts that she had doubting the evidence that put the killer away in the first place, evidence that she shared. So she has all sorts of turmoil, all sorts of conflict, and this story outlines in a beautifully enthralling way what she does as a result. It was a truly wild ride with a really great strong sense of place that had me mesmerized from beginning to end. So that's The It Girl by Ruth Ware. Definitely back to school vibes. I mean, it's literally taking place at Oxford, and the writing just puts you squarely there. But it also has that seasonal mood reading vibe with a mystery, with a suspense, and something that we can really dig our reading teeth into. So those were the two novels that fit the back to school vibe theme. And I want to end with something completely different, and that's a memoir. This memoir was beautiful. It was brilliant. I absolutely loved it, and I could not put it down. And this book is Where the Children Take Us by Zane E. Asher. Now, this is not a memoir about school. This is not a memoir about academics. It is not a memoir about a challenge or a murder or anything like we just discussed with the earlier two books. But I think it pairs really well with those two books because the memoir threads that are here are beautiful in relation to success in academics and expectation. So the book begins with just this beautiful, brilliant, yet very heartbreaking account of loss. So Asher starts her family story by really detailing the loss of her father. And in that story, you just get so incredibly connected to these characters. From there, she shares her mother's incredible strength and her desire to see her students or her children and students succeed while still grappling with the loss herself. And then Asher takes us on her own journey in her own story. So we have the beginning, we have the middle, and then we have the end where we don't want to stop turning the pages. Now, why is this in a back to school kind of vibe book flight? Well, because this powerful mother is doing absolutely everything she can to make sure her children are successful and well taken care of, especially because she is doing this job alone. As you read, you cannot help but be swept up in that back to school vibe. I mean, this mom does everything she can to put her kids in the line of success. She starts a family book club with Western literary classics. She plasters newspaper clippings of Black success stories on the walls. She goes looking for any role model that she can find and introduce to her children, and practices Shakespeare with her son, finishes morning or homework in the wee hours of the morning with Zane. She literally cuts the TV cord in half and installs a residential payphone so that her kids cannot possibly have any other distraction except school, except success, except funneling their efforts into their own worth. It was a beautiful book. And as I read it, and I imagine as you read it too, you kind of see multiple versions of yourself. We can think about your younger self working so hard to be good at something or to be good at school. You've got the current self that might be currently trying to do something better, to learn something, to be a better parent. And there's our future self who hopefully is going to look back with pride on what we have done and what our own kids would say about us. So this is an academic book in the sense that you just learn so much from this mom about how to make things work and how to help your students be successful, which is what we're all trying to do in this season, right? We are shifting from summer where it was more laid back, schedules went out the window, things were more spontaneous, and we didn't have a whole lot on our plate, or at least not as much. And now we're moving back into fall where we have to get up at certain times, and there's homework, and there's sports, and there's school events. And there are all of these things that can vie for our time and take our attention. And this book reminds us what matters most. Now, what matters most to you might not be the same as what matters most to the family in this book, but you can't help but be swept away and in awe of what this mother accomplished in relation to making sure her kids succeeded in school and therefore life. I think it is such a powerful book that's not just a book with back to school vibes, but it's a parenting manifesto as much as it is a memoir. And I absolutely loved it. So there you go. There are 3 books with back to school themes. Whether you're looking for a novel to set you square in the world of academia, if you're looking for a suspense story to give you that fall reading, mood reading kind of vibe, or maybe you want that memoir to give you a spark to remind you that this is back to school season and there are things we can do to make sure we succeed, I've got you covered in this book flight for sure. So I would love to know what your best back to school books would be if you were to recommend them. What books give you those back to school vibes? And here's the thing. For those of you that are the first ones to put a recommendation for me on Facebook and Instagram, I guess I should say, or Instagram, I'm going to send you a cup of coffee, your choice, Starbucks or Dunkin', on me in order to kickstart a fall day. So all you have to do is post to Facebook or post to Instagram what your favorite back to school book or books might be, tag me, and I could be sliding into your instant messages with a cup of coffee to make one of your fall days better. So here's wishing everyone a wonderful back to school season, full of lots of wonderful reading, more to come on some mood reading as we move through the fall, as well as some fun author interviews and shaking up our writing notebooks as we end 2023 and we near the last 120 days. So stay tuned for more of that. Happy reading and thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. Plus, if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, bibliotherapy book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much, much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.